Have you ever had a dream so terrifying that even in the waking world, thinking back to it caused you trauma? Have you ever had a dream so terrifying that when you were suddenly shocked awake and a friend or a person laying next to you asked you, "What is it? What were you dreaming about?" You actually had trouble trying to recall it because you knew it would do damage to you to speak about it while awake. Tonight we're going to be going over an Asian version of a lot of the nightmares that you may have had in your own sleep, but this time from an Eastern perspective. We're going to be reading some of the most ferocious and frightening Japanese dreams that people have ever had here in Japan. And we're going to be going over to why there's symbolism within those that mean a lot to the Japanese people, mythology from their past, and even modern Shinto religions. Join me now for another Osuroshi night. If you ever get a chance to check out the magazine rack at a konbini in Japan, you'll be able to find just about every magazine you can imagine, including some that are about the occult. One of those that is now out of print was known as Akuma Trauma. Akuma Trauma used to cover everything from UFOs and alien sightings to getting into the symbolism behind nightmares. They would have readers write in and talk about horrific things they had dreamed about. One such reader talked about a ritual that their father, who was a Buddhist monk, had taught them if they wanted to try and explore their own nightmares to learn more about who they were. That ritual is a very simple one. Number one, you just wished to have a nightmare, spoke it out loud, and then took your pillow, put it on your futon, and stomped on it 9 times with your foot. Well, it seems like this reader did that, and the dream that they describe having afterwards is quite horrifying. Let's listen to that now. It was time for me to go to sleep, and I hated doing that as I was just a little kid. So, in order to entertain myself, I remembered the story my father, who was a monk, had taught me earlier in the day about someone who had come to his shrine complaining of nightmares. He talked about a ritual that would either make or break nightmares. To have nightmares, he said, take your pillow and put it upon your futon and stomp on it 9 times. I decided I was going to do that. I wanted to have something interesting to dream about tonight, even if it was scary. That night, I had a dream. In that dream, I was caring for my granddad who passed away long ago. In this dream, he was somehow bedridden and near my room on a giant hospital bed that had way too many tubes inserted into his nose and arms. Nonetheless, he smiled affably when other members of the family came around. But when I was close to him and alone and near his face, he would turn ghastly pale and would start muttering something under his breath. Honestly, I was terrified of him even in real life, and in this dream even more so. During this dream, I got a bit mischievous and decided to pull out one of the tubes while pretending to care for him. All of a sudden, his condition took a turn for the worst. Machines started blaring all kinds of beeps and sirens. All of the family members rushed into the room. Granddad, with his ghastly pale face, began tearing at his throat and groaning in pain. And even though it was simply a dream, I began to panic. What have I done? Is he going to die? And what if they find out what I've done to him? Nonetheless, I pretended I didn't know what was causing his pain. I ran to his side just like the others had done. It was during that time when I was right next to him. I heard him finally muttering what I could hear under his breath, "Shine," over and over again, which means "you die" in Japanese. I woke, but realized I had still not left the dream. I had woken from that dream, but was still in another layer of the same dream. This time, the dream began again, but without my grandfather in the room. I was still walking around in his old house with yellowing wallpaper and shoji doors where the paper was peeling off. I remember walking through each room and even being able to smell the smell that was my grandparents' house. It was actually kind of nice at first. I could look at the things that I used to play with while I was there, the couches and the beds I used to jump on as a little kid, and as I was exploring a little bit of everything, I began to hear a slight murmuring, just like before when I had heard my grandfather speaking about something underneath his breath. As I moved around the house, I could hear it was getting louder and louder from different rooms. I followed the loudness and tried to see where the sound was coming from. When I finally realized it had been coming from the room in which my grandfather's hospital bed had been placed in. I was worried about going in there and seeing him once again appear, but lucky for me, when I walked in, the room had been emptied out just like on the day he had died. Nonetheless, his voice was louder than ever. Was this a ghost? Was this some sort of premonition in my head? How was I still hearing it? I felt a wet drop hit me on the top of the head, and when I looked up to see where it had dropped from, there, on the ceiling of the room my grandfather had died in, his hospital bed was somehow on the ceiling, floating upside down, with him strapped to it in so many tubes it looked like some sick science fiction creation. Again, he began to scream, "You die, you die, you die," and then I awoke. Medical themes are often something, even in the West, we dream about as far as nightmares are concerned. And as Japan continues to have more and more of an elderly population, they begin to work their way into the nightmares of many. One of the worst things is losing an elderly but beloved family member. And it seems just like we would deal with trauma from that in the Western world, they do so in Japan as well. Next up, we have lucid dreaming in Japan. Yes, it's also common there, and if you don't know what lucid dreaming is, it's pretty much when you start to realize you are dreaming and then try to take control of the dream. In this story, a Nichaner, which is pretty much the equivalent to America's 4chan, is going on a board and talking in a forum about how he got deeper and deeper into lucid dreaming, but then, well, things started to go wrong. Let's look into it further. When I went to university, my dreams became much more fun than reality. And there was a period of time when I spent about 10 hours per day, every day, sleeping. At that time, I was having lucid dreams 2 to 3 times a week. I could will myself to wake up whenever I wanted to. I would just tell myself, "Wake up," whenever I seemed to get bored of whatever I was lucid dreaming about. Dreaming was so much fun that I wanted my dream world to swap places with the real world. However, I quit keeping a dream diary while I was at university because I read about the danger of a dream diary on the internet. But another more important reason was I directly went through a really scary experience myself. From here begins the story of what happened to me during the summer of my 4th year at university. I was in my own apartment room, and I was in a dream. Then a woman, looking like a sort of cliché Japanese ghost with her long black hair and white kimono, walked in through the window of the room. As I'd often had scary dreams before, I was pretty much unfazed, and it only took me a moment to realize I was now in a dream and could control it. So, I soon tried to manipulate the dream so that the ghost would turn into my favorite actress. But somehow, I couldn't manipulate this part of the dream no matter how long I tried, and the woman was still walking closer to me. There seemed to be no way for me to wake up, even though I was used to using my own normal way of telling myself to do so. In my mind, I began to say Shinto prayers and shout, "Wake up, wake up." Finally, I woke up. I was lying on my bed, and I was feeling very thirsty. I went to the kitchen to get something to drink and opened the fridge, and there, to my shock, I found the same woman with her head freshly severed and inside my refrigerator. Just then I realized I was still dreaming and was back to being lucid. It was a dream within a dream. I prayed and began to scream that I should wake up again. When my eyes opened, now I was finally laying down, in my bed and in my room. Phew, finally, I thought. Just before I looked over on my bedside, and that same woman was laying next to me. I screamed and finally woke up again. Now I was laying down in my bed, but starting to feel a bit scared. Was I in a dream, and still inside of a dream? This situation was starting to get out of hand in my mind. I was living alone, which made me feel even more scared. So I decided in my dream, if I was there, I would visit a friend who lived nearby at the time. While I was heading towards my friend's house on foot, I felt something wasn't right. My friend's house was only like a 1-minute walk from my own. But no matter how long I walked, I couldn't reach it. I just kept walking and walking down the sidewalk looking for him. It was so weird and scary. Then, as I continued rushing down the sidewalk, I saw that same woman walking towards me in the opposite direction. I was still in the dream. Perhaps, even when I woke up today and wrote this down, I'm still stuck in the dream. The poster actually had this as their final post, even though they had been on Nichon for quite some time. Sometimes as young children, we experience dreams and we don't know what their meaning are. And sometimes we experience dreams that are horrifying to us and they become nightmares, even though they would never be scary to adult us. Well, this is the dream of a child whose dream would not only be scary to adults, but I think scary internationally. Let's listen to her horrific dream about riding the train in Japan. Ever since I was a young child, I had very vivid dreams. I was sometimes aware when I was dreaming and would realize I was even in a dream. This time was the same. I was standing on a platform in a dark, empty railway station. It was a bit of a gloomy dream, I thought. Then an announcement was made in a dull, spiritless voice from a man who spoke. "The train is approaching. If you get on it, something will happen." It sounded nonsensical. Soon the train came in, but it wasn't a proper train. It was this weird, strange sort of shaped train, like it had a face or a skull or something strange attached to the front. You might see it like at a toy store, or it looked like a miniature that was from a sci-fi. Nonetheless, I saw some women get in and get seated in a row, so I did the same thing. I sensed something unusual and very strange about this dream and this train, and I decided to get on nonetheless just to see how much fear I could actually take, because it was already feeling unsettling. If I really found it to be too much, I could always wake myself up. I was able to make myself wake up whenever I wanted, but the only time that I could was when I was aware of dreaming, just like I was now. I settled into the third seat from the back. The air around me felt so realistic and warm. It was hard to believe this was actually a dream. "The train is departing," said the announcement, and it began. My heart was pounding hard with anxiety and expectation. The train entered into a tunnel soon after leaving the platform, and the tunnel was illuminated with a mysterious purple-type light. This tunnel, I thought, is like the tunnel I saw on that ghost train ride in the amusement park I went to on Wednesday. This thing I'm on now is also looking kind of the same as that same ride that I was scared of when I was younger. But just like any other dreams, I just made up pieces of my own memories and found them used on the actual train I was riding. Like as if pieces of what scared me from a train ride at an amusement park in the past were being placed here into this train now. Just then, there was another announcement. "The station is Slice Station." Slice Station? You mean like slice like a fish? While I was still wondering, a loud scream broke up from behind. When I turned around, I saw the man in the last seat on my train was being carried off by 4 very short persons dressed in rags. Before my eyes, the man was cut with sharp knives. An overpowering stench filled the air, and the man screamed and screamed until my ears began to hurt. Bloody intestines and various organs were pulled out of the man's body and scattered all around. Immediately behind me sat an ashen-faced woman with long hair. but she seemed totally uninterested in what was happening offside the train, in spite of it being a ghastly scene. One thing I was certainly unprepared for was what was going to happen as this train took a strange turn of events. I began to feel slightly scared. I thought I would wait a little longer and see what happened next, and then try to wake up. Before I knew it, the man on the last seat was gone, leaving behind me only some dark reddish blood chunks of meat. The woman behind me was looking straight ahead, with a blank look on her face. "The next station is Gouging Station," said the announcements. This station had two more short people come on, and with something that looked like serrated spoons, they began to gouge out the eyes of the woman sitting next to me. The woman's face, which had been totally blank only a moment before, turned into a mask of great fear and pain. Then came from her an ear-piercing scream, which nearly shattered my eardrums. I saw her eyeballs pop out. The stench of sweat and blood was unbearable. I bent over, trembling with fear. This was it. I couldn't bear any more of this. Guessing from how things would go from here, I decided it was time to get out of the dream and attempted to do the same thing I always had, which was forcing my eyes open in the dream. Alas, it did not work. "The next station is Meat Station." This was the worst I could possibly expect. I could easily imagine what was going to happen next. I focused all my energy on waking up from the dream. "Wake up, wake up, wake up," I said to myself. Usually, with enough prayer and enough screaming in my head, I could usually do it. But it did not work this time. The small midget crew crawled up into my lap and held up some sort of device and waved it in front of me. It must be some sort of tool. All I know is I closed my eyes and can frantically remember saying "wake up" over and over again. It still did not work. Finally, as we approached closer to the station, I could feel wind and pressure go across my face. And just when I thought we were at the end and everything would become still and quiet, I managed to escape the nightmare. I was wet all over with sweat and tears, with all sorts of emotions streaming down my face. It wasn't until after I went to the kitchen and drank a lot of water that I finally was able to calm down. The dream was real. It was too real. But it was just a dream, and nothing more, I told myself. The following day at school, I told my friends all about the dream. All they did was find it funny. They laughed and said, "It was just a dream. Why are you so worked up?" 4 years passed, and I became a college student. I kept myself busy with studying and work. So much had been going on with my life that by the time I completely forgotten about that dream, I was a college student. Then one night, it started again. "The next station, Gouging Station," the dream began. It began from that scene. Immediately, memories came flooding back. Things carried on exactly the same way as before. The two midgets were gouging out the women's eyes next to me. I started praying straight away, "Wake up, wake up." But this time, for some reason, I couldn't wake up as easily as the last time. "Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up," I kept saying. "The next station is Meat Station," said the announcement. Time was running out. I heard the familiar buzzing that each station would use to signal the doors opening and the midgets coming to collect people. A dead silence descended. I somehow managed to escape again with a huge relief. I was about to open my eyes when I heard, "Are you going to run away again? But this time is the last stop for the station." It was the announcer's mundane voice again in the dream. Luckily, I opened my eyes and I was back in my room. Why? Why was I having this dream, and why did I deserve it? Since then, I have not had the same dream again, but I know that if I ever do dream it again, I will either die in the dream from a heart attack or something similar like a stroke. It might appear to be a heart attack in real life, but in the dream, I will have died at Meat Station. One of the more interesting aspects of Japanese nightmares is the fear of being trapped inside of one. often the stories that I read when researching the nightmarish worlds that Japanese and Eastern Asian people dream up, there's always this concept of dreaming and never being able to escape. It's even been seen in one of the best known horror manga authors, Junji Ito's Long Dream, in which a man is trapped longer and longer inside of his dream world until it becomes a permanent thing. You'll notice that theme kind of echoes throughout all of the different stories I'm reading tonight, and that doesn't stop with the next one, in which a person wanders around a haunted area within their dreams and seems to be stuck there as well. I'm the type of person who has lucid dreams, and that's why I'm writing it here in my blog today, because this one was above and beyond all other lucid dreams I had had in the past. This dream, in fact, was nothing like anything I've had in the past. I was alone, walking down a narrow path in the woods, and immediately I knew I was dreaming. The color green was too vivid, and the unnatural way the soles of my shoes scraped against the ground was a familiar sign of a lucid dream. Normally, when I realize I'm in a lucid dream, I soon try to wake up and then go back to sleep again after. But this time, somehow, I didn't feel like waking up, so I just kept walking down a downward spiral slope in nature. A house appeared in front of me during this time, and it was a crumbling, old-style, traditional Japanese wooden house. Very old indeed. It must have stood there for over a century, but from the size of it, it could have been a storage building or a residential quarter, I don't know. Nonetheless, I did not recognize this house. It was the first time an unfamiliar place had ever showed up in my lucid dreams. Usually, my mind just creates wherever I'm at from my memories. It was dark inside the house, but because of the light that was coming from the outside nature, I left the door open and was actually able to see inside. There was a dusty wardrobe, a large mirror. It was covered with spiders and spider webs, which were left laying around. Some detached wooden planks, some small wooden box, and some spinning tops were scattered all over the floor. The place was a complete ruin. Then I thought to myself, wait a minute, why am I even in this place? Why am I walking further into darker areas of the house? It's a lucid dream. I know I'm dreaming. I control it. What am I doing? I peered behind a panel screen that stood in front of me. I think I know what's behind it, I thought. Nonetheless, when I opened it, I was still a bit surprised to see a big purple kimono spread out long and sleek. There was black hair coming out of it. When I moved it aside, there was a body of a girl lying face down, immobile, with her arms and legs sprawling. She appeared to be a corpse. I don't know what made me do it, but before I knew it, I was holding her body in my arms and turning it over. The girl was younger than I expected. She was probably around 17 or 18 years old. Her face was pale, and I didn't know whether she was alive or dead. She was extremely thin, too. And also, now that I think about it, her purple kimono was soaking wet. Suddenly, my smartphone went off. It seemed too timely, and out of no place, hearing its alarm shocked me. A mail flashed in my inbox with the title, Akemi. Only one word in the mail? Akemi? Somehow I thought this must be the girl's name. Then another mail arrived. Tsukisi. What does this mean? I don't really understand. I frantically shook my arms as I noticed spiders were crawling down it, and so were all sorts of spider webs attached to it that had come from the girl, who was suddenly lurching forward and thrusting her arms forward towards me. Her eyes were wide open. Her eyes open but dull. They were rotten, and there was nothing able to close them. She had no eyelids. I had never even noticed this before. Her decaying jaw opened up and stretched beyond its limit, tearing the flesh in the process. Afterwards, I awoke screaming. I was back in reality, back in my room. I opened my eyes, I look around, and it was just a dream.
just a dream. I get my breath back, and I have to think straight. And I decide to get up and just go use the bathroom and maybe go back to sleep. As I get up to start to walk, I hear somebody knock at the door. I go out there and realize in front of me there's a bunch of nature that I'd never seen before. I decide to start walking down the path I see within the nature in front of my house, down the narrow path and into the woods. Wait, haven't I woken up already? I thought I just opened my eyes. What's going on? I'm still stuck in my lucid dream. But something seems different. Something seems more terrible. I walk deeper in the woods. I step inside the derelict house. I peer behind the panel screen. The purple kimono girl's lying there. I lift her in my arms as if everything was scripted. I start carrying out the motions again and again. I feel nothing inside, and again, as if on script, my smartphone goes off. I see a mail from Akemi. Then another mail comes up and says, Tsukisi. The girl leaps up, but this time I knock her arms down and turn around quickly and run out of the house.
I become so horrified and so anxious about escaping the house that actual real life fear starts to overtake me. A panic and a fear that's so great I literally feel myself blacking out in my own dream. I pass out in my dream and everything fades to nothing. When I wake up in my bed, finally, my phone goes off again. This time I wake up in the real world. When I looked at my phone this morning and began to write this blog, I had 2 emails, one from Akemi and one from Tsukisi. Both of these were friends who had died in real life on an airplane accident that had happened over the mountains of Japan. I'm not sure if this was stretching over into my dream world, if I was having some sort of psychic vision, but I've lost 2 friends today and suffered through one of the worst nightmares of my life. What was weird about this one was referring to a reoccurring dream the person had had due to friends and family they had died in a flight. When I researched this blog a little bit further, it was written by a Japanese man who back in 1985 was a member of a family who had people die in Flight 123, which was a domestic flight that crashed about 12 minutes into takeoff over the mountains of Japan. It was a pretty tragic crash, as all are, and this one was worse because it wasn't bad enough to kill everybody on board. The people who were hurt and mangled and left on a mountaintop were suffering and in the cold, and the US military actually reached out to the Japanese government and said we could go out there right now and start to help these people. We've got all sorts of resources nearby at our Yokohama base, but instead of saying, yeah, it's okay, go out there and help them, the Japanese military pretty much said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of our own people. We've got medics and stuff we can send out there. But what they didn't describe was how much red tape the government would have to go through to get these places ready and these emergency services ready. And they ended up taking more than 84 hours to get people ready to come take care of those who had crashed upon the mountain, leaving people slowly suffering and dying when the US military could have gone out there and helped a little bit quicker. I suppose the dream that this guy was having was the sort of post-traumatic stress of having family members die in that crash, trying to reach out to them and not being able to get through. And he was getting notifications and stuff and people trying to reach out to him, and I guess this continues to show up in his dreams all the time, the 2 people he knew who had died in that crash. It's kind of sad, kind of morbid, and an extremely dark nightmare to be sure. Let's move on. This type of dream is a collective dream, which are often shared by Japanese. As you know, Japanese are indigenous to their area, and they tend to share a lot of the same predictable aspects of life as far as how work goes and how everyday interactions work as well. And some say they even share a lot of the same collective dreams. And that's what's written about in this blog right here called The Fall and Die Village Dream. Most people forget about the contents of their dream immediately after waking up, but there are still numerous reports about the dream collected from all over the country. This dream begins with a scene in a farmer's village. The sun is setting, and there are blue and purple dead bodies lying everywhere. After a while, a few young girls in kimonos come up to you and explain that this is Fall and Die Village. As soon as they finish telling you this, one of the girls trips over one of the dead bodies and falls and dies. She screams and her body eventually turns blue and purple and stops moving. There are several variations as to what happens next. Some people have reported that they got chased by the girls and ran around the village like crazy. And some say they were forced to play a tag game or a run and hide game while on stilts. Others say nothing particular happened and they just woke up. But somehow, there are no accounts of the dream from someone who actually tripped and fell, because most likely they died while asleep. That about does it for the dreams for today, or I really should say the nightmares. I hope you enjoyed a few of those, but before we end this episode of Osoroshi Saturday, I'd like to add a little bit of media onto the end of this as some recommended reading. If you're still interested in hearing more about more Asian Japanese or a more media-based theme on learning about some of the ideas put forward within dreams. Many of them, like I said, get the person looped, caught, stuck, or permanently within a dream. And another one just like that is very well-known horror author Junji Ito's Long Dream. If you're not familiar with it, let me talk a little bit about it now. Long Dream is the first chapter of Volume 14 of The Horror World of Junji Ito, which is in a book called The Story of the Mysterious Tunnel. The Long Dream is among one of his most famous short stories and received an actual live-action television film adaptation in 2000, which you're actually seeing on screen now, as well as an animated adaptation to in the second episode of the 2018 anime Junji Ito collection. In it, a girl named Mami is in the hospital where she is awaiting brain surgery. She claims that the personification of death has visited her and that she is going to die soon. She pleads with Dr. Kuroda to save her, but Kuroda believes she is just delusional. The man who visited her is actually another patient named Tetsuro Mukoda. Mukoda has horrific nightmares, which, although lasting only one night, are the equivalent of a year or more within his dream. The doctors have no idea what to do with him, but each night his dreams become 1 year longer. Over time, events that happened yesterday now seem like 50 years or more to him. And he begins talking as if he came from a different century. He also ages to look like an extremely old man. One day, Mukoda wakes up screaming for Mami. He says that she is his wife, whom he met in the hospital, and they now have been together for 1,000 years. Kuroda, the doctor, realizes that Mukoda, the dreamer, has dreamed of her as his wife after he saw her in his room. Mukoda calls Mami and goes to her, but she screams and declares that death has come back to get her, and that's how the original intro of this whole story started. Kuroda is able to explain to the dreamer Mukoda that his life with Mami was just another dream in his head. Shortly after this, Mukoda records his longest dream yet. When dawn breaks, his body shatters into a pile of dust, his body having grown too old to keep pace with his dreams. Kuroda studies the crystals but can't find a link to Mukoda's condition. Mami then begins to also have long dreams, just like Mukoda, and when questioned, Kuroda admits he administered part of Mukoda's dust and remains into her via injection. He reasons that since she fears death and being nothingness, reaching a state of eternal dreaming is like keeping her alive forever. If this is your first time joining me for today here on Osidoshi, thank you for making it all the way to the end of your first video. If you enjoy anything horror-based, especially that from Asia and even more so from Japan, that's what this channel's all about. Every episode will be a new type of horror theme or story from Asia based on either movies, video games, myths, urban legends, and the occult. Come here anytime you want to learn something new about horror over in the East and get away from some of that Hollywood junk and possibly actually learn a little more spooky stories that have a little more depth to them than some of the junk coming out of the West right now. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, I'd really appreciate your like, comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, and maybe if you had a nightmare of your own you'd like to share with us, I'd be happy to read it in the comments below. Until next time, I'm Unrested, and I'll talk to you again real soon here on Osidoshi Nights. Have a good one.